If you're not ready to step up and cover the gaps, then maybe we shouldn't be together. She said it without raising her voice, like she was stating a practical fact instead of drawing a line. We were sitting at the small kitchen table in our shared apartment, the one we'd assembled together on a Sunday afternoon. Her phone was face down. Mine buzzed once, then went quiet again. I asked her what gaps she meant, even though I already knew. She sighed like I was being difficult on purpose. Rent was due soon. Utilities were higher than expected. Her credit card balance was tight again. She said my income was steadier, so it made sense for me to absorb more until things evened out. We had talked about this before. When we moved in together, she was the one who insisted on shared finances. Same account, same transparency, same percentage contributions. She said that was how real partners did it. I asked why the joint account was several thousand lower than it should have been. She waved her hand and said prices were insane lately. Groceries, gas, random expenses. She said tracking every dollar was exhausting and made her feel judged. Then she said if I loved her, I wouldn't turn money into a battlefield. That was when I felt the shift. I opened my banking app and scrolled through the transactions. There were charges I didn't recognize. Not utilities, not groceries, clothing stores she'd never mentioned, a hotel charge from a weekend she told me she was at a work retreat, a rideshare bill in a city she supposedly hadn't visited in years. I asked her about the hotel. Her expression changed, not to guilt, but irritation. She said it was for a conference overflow and she didn't feel obligated to report every detail of her life. She said the problem wasn't the spending, it was my need to control it. I reminded her it was our money. She said money was just money and accused me of acting like an accountant instead of a boyfriend. She said she worked hard too and deserved to enjoy herself without interrogation. Then she circled back to the ultimatum. If I couldn't handle being the stable one, she'd have to rethink us. That was when the second issue stopped being abstract. I asked her how much debt she was carrying on her personal cards. She paused. Not long, but long enough. She gave me a number that didn't line up with what I already knew. Earlier that morning, I'd seen a soft credit pull notification tied to our address. She'd forgotten she'd used it when opening an account months ago. The balance wasn't small. It wasn't temporary. It was 5 figures, spread across multiple cards, minimum payments shuffled around, late fees quietly absorbed. I told her I'd seen it. She snapped back immediately, saying I'd crossed a line, said it was invasive, said everyone had debt and I was acting superior. She accused me of weaponizing information instead of supporting her. Then she said something that clarified everything. She said if I wanted a future with her, I needed to stop fixating on numbers and start acting like a partner. That partners carried each other when things got heavy. That love meant not asking questions that made someone uncomfortable. What she was really saying was that my role was to stabilize her decisions without being informed about them. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I asked how long she'd been hiding it. She said hiding was the wrong word. She said it just hadn't felt relevant yet. She said once things improved, she would have told me. I thought about the last 6 months. How often I'd covered shortfalls without discussion. How often she'd promised to communicate better next time. How quickly irritation replaced honesty whenever I asked for clarity. This wasn't a single mistake. It was a system. She had already decided how this worked. I absorbed risk. She retained control. And if I questioned it, the relationship itself was put on the table. She stood up, grabbed a glass of water, and told me again that rent didn't wait for feelings. She said I needed to decide whether I was in or out, because she didn't have time for hesitation. I told her I needed the night to think. She rolled her eyes and said thinking wouldn't change the math. Then she went to bed and shut the door like the conversation was over. I stayed up. I downloaded statements. I saved transaction histories. I pulled credit reports. Not to confront her, but to understand exactly what I was being asked to inherit. By the time the sun came up, I wasn't confused anymore. I just hadn't told her yet. The next morning, she acted like nothing had happened. She made coffee, scrolled her phone, asked if I wanted eggs. The ultimatum from the night before hung in the air, untouched. That was always her move. Say something heavy, then behave like it was settled. I told her we needed to talk before work. She sighed and said we'd already talked. She said she'd been clear about what she needed and didn't see the point in rehashing it. When I didn't move, she sat back down, already irritated. I asked her to be honest with me about the debt. She immediately framed it as an attack, said I was obsessed, said I was turning a temporary issue into a character flaw. She said people who cared didn't interrogate, they helped. I asked again, how much and how long? She finally admitted it had been building for over a year. Travel, clothes, covering gaps when her income dipped. She said it sounded worse than it was because I was looking at it clinically. She said the balances would go down once things stabilized. I asked why she never mentioned it when we merged finances. She said she didn't want to scare me. Then she said she didn't think it mattered because she assumed eventually we'd be fully combined anyway. Married, shared everything. Her tone made it sound inevitable, not disgust. That's when the manipulation became obvious. She wasn't asking me to help her solve a problem. She was slowly transferring ownership of it to me. I told her I wasn't comfortable covering expenses while also being kept in the dark, that if we were sharing money, we needed full transparency going forward. She laughed, not kindly. She said that was unrealistic, that relationships weren't spreadsheets, that if I needed that much control to feel safe, maybe I wasn't ready for a real partnership. She reminded me again that rent was due soon and that stress wasn't helping. Then she escalated it. She said if I pulled back financially, she'd see it as abandonment. She said she wouldn't stay with someone who could watch her struggle and do nothing. She said love wasn't conditional. What she meant was that my boundaries were. I realized in that moment that there was no version of this conversation where she took responsibility without resenting me for it. Any limit I set would be framed as betrayal. So I stopped negotiating. I told her I was separating my finances immediately. I said I would cover my portion of rent and utilities directly, but I wouldn't be depositing anything else into the joint account. Her face hardened. She accused me of punishing her, said I was creating instability on purpose, said I was choosing money over her. She reminded me of everything she'd sacrificed to live together, how she'd rearranged her life. I didn't argue with any of it. I just repeated the plan. She asked if I was threatening to leave. I said no. I said I was removing myself from a situation that wasn't honest. That's when she dismissed me completely. She stood up and said she didn't have time for this drama. Said she'd figure it out herself if that's how I wanted to play it. She grabbed her bag and left for work without another word. By noon, I had moved my paycheck redirect. By afternoon, I had closed my access to the joint credit line. Everything was clean and documented. I sent her one message. Short, clear. I said I'd pay my share of rent and utilities directly going forward. Nothing else. No debates. She didn't respond. That evening, I packed a bag. Not because I was fleeing, but because I needed distance. I left a note on the counter saying I'd be staying elsewhere for a bit. No accusations, no emotion. The first real consequence showed up 2 days later. She texted me asking why her card had been declined. Final update. I didn't answer her right away. The text about the declined card sat on my screen for most of the day. There were 3 follow-ups after that. First confusion, then irritation, then a message telling me this wasn't the time to be petty. I replied once. I reminded her that I'd separated my finances and closed my access to the joint credit line. I told her nothing had changed on my end. Short sentences, no tone. She accused me of sabotaging her, said she was embarrassed at a checkout line because of me, said I could have warned her. I didn't respond to that. By the end of the week, the messages shifted. The anger drained out and was replaced by logistics. She asked if I could front rent this month and she'd make it up later. She asked if I could temporarily move money back into the account just so things didn't snowball. I said no. I paid my share directly to the landlord and forwarded the confirmation. Utilities too. Everything exactly on time. Exactly my portion. That's when the real consequences started stacking. Her cards didn't just get declined once. They stayed that way. Minimum payments bounced. Late fees hit. One account froze entirely. Another lowered her limit without warning. She started selling things. First clothes, then electronics. She posted furniture from the apartment online. I recognized pieces I'd helped carry up the stairs. I wasn't there to watch it happen. I stayed out of the apartment completely. I didn't block her, but I didn't engage beyond necessary logistics. A mutual friend reached out asking if everything was okay. Apparently, she'd mentioned being financially blindsided. I told him we'd separated finances and that was it. I didn't defend myself. I didn't explain her choices. I didn't need to. The story changed depending on who she talked to. Sometimes I was controlling. Sometimes I was cheap. Sometimes I was heartless. The inconsistency did more damage than anything I could have said. A month later, I went back to the apartment to pick up the rest of my things. She wasn't home. Half the living room was gone. The closet looked like it had been stripped quickly, not thoughtfully. There were envelopes on the counter, past due notices, final warnings, not addressed to me. I packed quietly and left my keys on the table. The last message she sent me was long. It talked about how I abandoned her when she needed me, how I let money ruin something real, how I'd regret not fighting harder. I didn't reply. A few weeks after that, I heard she'd moved out suddenly. Not planned, not smoothly. She'd taken a short-term place she couldn't afford and started borrowing to stay afloat. People stopped answering her calls one by one. I didn't feel satisfied. I didn't feel angry. I felt relieved. Walking away didn't punish her. It just removed the safety net she assumed was permanent. I didn't expose her. I didn't warn anyone. I didn't demand repayment or closure. I just stopped absorbing consequences that weren't mine. And without that, everything else collapsed on its own.